Statistician General Risenga Maluleke has just released the third quarterly labour force survey results, which indicate that the country's employment situation has deteriorated even further. Mr. Maluleke joins me now, along with our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, as we begin unpacking these numbers further. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Risenga Maluleke. Good to have you with us today. Although not the bearer of good news once again this afternoon, as the unemployment figures have once again escalated.
Well, I always make the numbers available. I can't talk about good or bad. The Statistician General has to make numbers available at all times.
Well, let's take a look, Statistician. This time last quarter, the rhetoric that we were saying is that these are the worst numbers since the start of the QLFS in 2008. Talk to us about the difference in these numbers compared to last quarter.
Tammy, we can't, a statistician in official practice cannot say best or worst numbers. We use lowest or highest. The last quarter was the highest we had seen, that is quarter 2 of 2021. And indeed, when we look at this quarter, this current quarter that we are reporting on, quarter 3 of 2021, there are a few observations that we have made. Firstly is the number of those that were employed has dropped by 660,000 people. That is from 14.9 million to 14.3 million. The number of those that are unemployed has also dropped from 7.8 million in the second quarter. It dropped by 183,000 people to 7.6 million people. And this is the 7.6 million people that represents the unemployment rate of 34.9%. And this is a rise from the previous quarter by 0.5 of a percentage point. So when we look at that, 0.5 percentage points up from 34.4% to 34.9%. Now what we see also is the discouraged work seekers. They were sitting at 3.3 million people in the second quarter of 2021. They rose by 545,000 people to 3.9 million. Other not economically active have gone up as well. So when we take, because the discouraged work seekers belong to the not economically active, we see them having gone up in total by about 988,000. So generally, one of the things we are observing as well is unemployment continues to hit young people and women the most, particularly black African women.
Mr. Maluleke, almost half of the jobs that were lost between the second and the third quarter came from the provinces of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. How much of the July unrest that we saw that month played a role when it comes to these stats?
Certainly, when we look at the third quarter, it's within the space where we had unrests in July. And generally, all over the country, we have lost about 660,000 jobs of those that were employed. And when we go further to unpack, we pick up that in the 2 provinces, they account for about half of the jobs lost. KwaZulu-Natal accounting for about 123,000 jobs that were lost from those that were employed, and about 200,000 accounted for by Gauteng. But not only that, we also have the discouraged work seekers who have increased, and also other not economically active. And one of the reasons when people who didn't go out to look for employment raised was that because of the unrest, they were afraid to go and look for employment. But furthermore, when we look at which sectors were hit the most, and let me start off by saying that only the finance sector was able to gain jobs, 138,000 jobs. The other sectors lost jobs. And the sector that was hit the most is trade. And we know that the July unrest did have a particular impact on trade. Trade has lost about 309,000 jobs, followed by community and social services, 210,000 jobs, and indeed construction and private households have lost 65,000 jobs each.
Mr. Maluleke, you mentioned earlier on that the hardest hit demographics here are the youth as well as women. Talk us through those numbers. And when you talk about women as well, there are dynamics of race as well that play into these numbers when you compare black women to white women, for example.
Let us look at youth aged 15 to 24 years. Their unemployment rate in the last quarter, that is second quarter of 2021, was sitting at 64.4%. It is now sitting, as of the quarter we are reporting on, third quarter, sitting at 66.5%. So it continues to rise. But we also see the same age cohort. There are about 10.2 million of them in the country, 15 to 24 years. About 3.4 of those are not in employment, education, or training. So they wake up every day and walk the streets. So they are quite vulnerable to labor markets. Let us look at women, particularly black African women. Their unemployment rate is sitting at 41%, which is far higher than the national average of 34.9%. But when we unpack further and look at the expanded unemployment rate, generally both black Africans and coloreds are hit the most. But women in those population groups are actually worse off than their male counterparts.
Mr. Maluleke,
let me also further mention that in general, black Africans, their unemployment rate is above the national average in general.
Mr. Maluleke, the labor force participation rate has decreased. Also, if you look at the formal, job sector, has also decreased. Talk to us about those two and why they are crucial when you do your survey.
Firstly, is the labor force participation rate is a proportion of those that are either employed or not employed. So what has happened is that if you look at the number of the employed people, it decreased by 660,000 people. So is the number of the unemployed, which decreased by 183,000 people, meaning that those that were employed and or not employed have decreased in the region by about 860,000 people. And this then has an impact in the labor force participation rate. That is why we see the decrease. And these people have actually moved to the discouraged work seekers as well as other not economically active, which are the discouraged work seekers and other not economically active people fall outside the labor force participation rate. So that's where these people moved into. That is the first issue. The second issue then comes to the absorption rate. The absorption rate is the proportion of those that are employed. As it has decreased, it also decreased as well. There was a second part of your question, Xolani, that you need to remind me briefly, and I'll deal with it.
The second part of the question was on the decrease in the formal job sector. We've seen an increase in the informal job sector of 9,000 jobs in the third quarter, but there was that massive decrease in the formal job sector. If you can talk to us about what you found in the QLFS.
Let us first explain what defines informal job sector. The informal job sector is that any company that is employing less than five people or less, and it's not VAT paying, then it's classified as informal. And now let us look at the others that may employ higher than 5 and of course are VAT paying, then will form into the formal sector. Now one thing that we have seen is although the finance sector gained about 138,000 jobs, all the other sectors have lost employment, particularly trade. If you look at trade, trade hires a large number of people, having lost about 309,000 jobs, and followed also by followed by construction that lost about 210,000 jobs, and community and social services. These are areas that have elements of the formal job sector in them. But also in terms of the share of the formal sector, it's sitting at 67.4% as of now. Generally, the formal sector falls between 67 and 69%, and that's what we have seen over a period of time. And this time it has dropped a bit from the previous quarter.
Mr. Maluleke, which are the provinces that had the highest loss of unemployment?
Firstly, let us look at provinces like your Limpopo and provinces like your Western Cape. And when we say losses in employment, we talk about formal, the official definition, because these are people who are actively looking for employment. So we have seen losses of jobs in Limpopo. We have seen job losses in the Western Cape as well. That is losses on unemployment. Whereas we have also seen in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng particularly losses of jobs in employment of those who were employed in the second quarter of 2021. Now, when you move further, these people actually went to the discouraged workership. But when you deal with unemployment, the Eastern Cape has generally, over a period of time, been sitting with the highest unemployment rate in the country. That is official, meaning that you have a lot of people in the Eastern Cape who are actively looking for employment. It's now sitting in the excess of 47%. And when you expand it further to the expanded definition, provinces like the Northern Cape, Limpopo, have now joined the Eastern Cape in hitting beyond the barrier of 50%. The expanded unemployment rate for these three provinces is sitting in the region of between 52 and 54.4%.
Mr. Maluleke, let's talk about something that is quite new that we've seen here in your survey. South Africa right now is expecting a fourth wave and yet another lockdown. You have found that of the people that you have surveyed, those who have jobs, 8 out of 10 of them are expected to be at work during lockdown. Why did you ask this question, particularly when it comes to lockdowns? What was your aim in asking that question, and what did the responses tell you?
Firstly, we will have had over a period of time that whenever the president addresses the nation, he indicates that imposing harsher levels of lockdown will harm the economy. And when the economy is not growing sufficiently enough or not performing sufficiently enough, it has an impact on jobs. And in this regard, we do continue to monitor the number of people that are expected to work during different levels of lockdown. And as we have indicated that 9 out of 10 of people are expected to work during different levels of lockdown. Generally, those who have tools of trade, like people in management and professionals, are able to work from home, where people like people in households, domestic workers, as well as people, machine operators and people in agriculture, are expected to work from their site of work. But not only that, we pick up that about 87% did receive full pay during lockdown, the levels of lockdown that we experienced in the third quarter, whereas others received reduced pay. People who are graduates and as of universities and coming out of other tertiary institutions tend to be more protected in terms of their jobs. They get full pay, whereas others, especially those with less than matric, they do receive reduced pay because most of them, their work is rated on hourly basis based on their availability to work at their place of work.
What do you make of a graduate unemployment sitting at 22.4%? It's quite a worrying number since these are, as you've said, professionals, people who are expected to easily walk into jobs and find other forms of employment.
Firstly is that the graduate unemployment remains below the national average. At about 22%, it sits below 34.9%, which is the national average. But not only that, other tertiary sits below national average. Only people with matric or less than matric are above the national average of national unemployment rate. So what happens is that while graduates are indeed still remain unemployed, theirs is much more better compared to other cohorts in the unemployment rate. So one of the things that one can say is that it doesn't necessarily guarantee that when someone is a graduate, they will easily walk in and get employment. It is based on whether employment is available or spaces of employment are available. And indeed, in this regard, one thing we are seeing is that graduates stand a better chance of being employed than any other group of or cohort of levels of education. Not only that, one of the things we have seen in some of our surveys is that levels of education and unemployment contribute to poverty. So when people are educated, and the higher they are educated, the more they are able to land a space in the employment arena. And as such, they are able to deal with challenges that they could face of poverty better than those with less than matric.
And if you can answer this question for us, there's been a lot of debate since the second quarter QLFS data was released, with South Africa being termed as having the worst unemployment rate in the world. Others saying that is not true. Can you clarify this for us? Does South Africa has the highest unemployment rate in the world?
South Africa is amongst nations with the highest unemployment rate in the world. Number one. Number two is that when you look at unemployment rate, it would be remiss or limited to only look at our employment or unemployment alone without looking at the structure or the size of our economy. The size of our economy as at 2015 prices is sitting at about 5.525 trillion per quarter. And when you look at that, and then compared with other nations, firstly, on the African continent, our economy is sitting third largest after Egypt and Nigeria. And in the world, our economy is bigger than that of Switzerland, of the United Arab Emirates, and Colombia. So when you look at unemployment, we need to look at a milieu of issues in terms of the size of the economy, at how strong it is, at what rate it's growing. But one thing I can say is that South Africa is indeed amongst the nations with highest unemployment in the world.
Mr. Risenga Maluleke, thank you very much for taking us through those numbers and those statistics for the unemployment figures, and thank you as well to our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa.